What's going on, my friends? I have yet another PC building video for you guys. I was able to build a powerful 1080p Ultra gaming PC for only 400 bucks using almost completely pre-owned components. Starting with the motherboard, here's the B450 Aorus Pro Wi-Fi, which I was able to snag from Facebook Marketplace for just 50 bucks. I also asked the seller if I could bundle his PSU and RAM for $90 total, and luckily he obliged. This is obviously a huge cop and isn't easy to replicate, but if you're willing to ask for a lower price off of used marketplaces, you'll be surprised to find some great results. This here is the Ryzen 7 3700X, which I got off Craigslist for just 50 bucks as well, and as you can expect from used hardware, I ran into a huge problem, or so I thought. The CPU had a glob of dried thermal paste on some of the pins. I tried scraping some of it off with a flathead, but it wasn't very effective. I tried using a Q-tip with some isopropyl alcohol, and that was enough to clear the pins, but it wasn't enough to clear the bottom of the CPU board. I've never so much as touched the CPU pins due to how delicate I know they can be, so seeing them smeared with thermal paste felt like a part of me died, and cleaning the pins off felt like I was entering a restricted area of PC building. But continuing with the build, the CPU cooler I'm using came with the pre-owned CPU, which was the Wraith Prism. This thing is much different from the other AMD coolers. It's actually half decent and can control the temps very well, especially for the CPU in particular. It's a little bit noisy and didn't come with any RGB controllers, but it ended up working out just fine. I plugged it into the CPU fan header, and that was it for the cooler. Next up, we have our RAM, which is 16 gigabytes of G.Skill Aegis RAM, which clocks in at 3200 megahertz. The next up, we have the SSD, which is 512 gigabytes of Inland TN320. And for an SSD that's only $30, it performs really well. And now that we're done working with the motherboard, we move on to the PC case, which with a little negotiating, I was able to buy for just $30 on Facebook Marketplace. And for our power supply, we're using the PowerSpec 650 BSM, which is funnily enough tier E on the PSU tier list, but I really don't give two shits about that, let's be honest. It's been working just fine, and the previous owner has had no issues with it aside from its lower wattage. So we screw in the PSU and organize the cables to where they will be powering the motherboard and GPU. The PC case being pre-owned barely had any of its standoffs in it, so I had to add new ones for my handy mounting kit I bought from Micro Center. We finally add the motherboard in and plug everything up, as well as our GPU, which is the RX 6650 XT. And now that the build is completely finished as far as the physical portion of it, we go ahead and give this thing a boot, and we find ourselves with a very good looking build. There was just one main issue, which was that the PC wouldn't boot and it wasn't giving us a display whatsoever. As seen from the red light on the motherboard, there was an issue with the physical build itself, and I had to figure out what was wrong. The red light was indicating an issue with the DRAM, but after trying multiple different RAM sticks in various different positions, I couldn't resolve the issue. I was left with two possible answers. The CPU was bad, or the motherboard BIOS was severely outdated and couldn't handle the 3rd gen Ryzen CPUs. But the bottom line was that I needed a 2000 series CPU to allow the PC to boot. And I needed to get a 2000 series CPU because this motherboard in particular did not allow for BIOS flashback, which is super unfortunate in this case. So I went out and bought a 2600X the very next day from eBay for just $35. Another huge event of luck because somebody in my very neighborhood was selling one. I placed the 2000 series CPU into the build, and sure enough, the PC worked fine, and I was able to update the BIOS where I found that it had never been updated before. It was running with BIOS version F4 all the way from 2019, and I had to update it to BIOS F32 before I could even update it to the most recent version. But as soon as I updated the BIOS, I went ahead and replaced the CPU with the 3700X, thoroughly cleaning it this time with a brush and isopropyl alcohol, which was very satisfying. It was good as new. The PC was now ready for Windows, which I quickly installed and booted up. Drivers were very easy to update since it already came with Wi-Fi, and the PC was ready for some benchmarks. And here's what the build was looking like. I really love the colors on the Wraith Prism, and the case looked pretty nice. The first benchmarking software I really love to use is 3D Mark. It's super nice and accurate, and it allows you to compare your results with hundreds of PCs with similar specs. It also only allows for universal optimizations, so the test results can't be boosted through application-specific optimizers, which is important for demonstrating true PC power. We ended up with a result of 1867, which is 7 points higher than the average for this PC. These results are great and show that we have a very formidable gaming machine based on its parts. We then run the CPU profile on 3D Mark, which measures the performance not just based on max load, but the recruitment of different thread counts. The 3700X has 8 cores and 16 threads, so we start by benchmarking all 16 and then test the performance of 8, then 4, then 2, and then single thread performance. Our final results were very good. Compared to the average 3700X, our CPU outperforms all the thread counts and in some categories by a lot. Our CPU temps were also really good, only reaching about 73 degrees under max load. Overall, we're off to a really good start. Up next, of course, we have Cyberpunk, where I demonstrate a great FPS on ultra settings in this indoor area, reaching about 95 to 100 FPS. I went ahead and changed the graphics to ray tracing low, which is more graphically demanding, and ran the benchmark simulator. We ended with an average of about 70 FPS, which is really good for an AMD GPU, which is supposed to struggle with ray tracing. I then ran ultra settings and got a respectable average of 83 FPS. We then move on to the Black Myth Wukong benchmark, which is one of the most graphically demanding titles from 2024. We ended with an average FPS of 99, which is great considering the textures were set at high and the super resolution was at 66. Although enabling ray tracing and bringing up the other settings will definitely drop this number considerably, but still, this PC is more than capable of playing modern games at high settings, solidifying it as a 1080p high to ultra gaming PC even in 2025. Now what I like to do is test the video encoder of the graphics card to determine how good this PC is at creating high quality gameplay footage. We crank the settings all the way up to ultra at 120 FPS and even use reshade filters. Using OBS and using the AMD GPU video encoder, you can see the GPU has no issue encoding the footage, and with a write speed of 1.5 gigabits per second, we can easily create recordings with a high quality and depth with a high FPS. I regrettably only used 30 FPS at medium settings because I didn't want to wait a while to transfer the footage to a USB, but the GPU can easily handle indistinguishable quality at 120 FPS. Although YouTube only takes 60 FPS recordings, so it makes the most sense to do that. What's great about the 3700X and the RX 6650 XT is that there's already a bunch of other benchmarking videos that go over dozens of games at both 1080p and 1440p quality. If you want to see more information on how these parts perform, I would definitely check those out, but nevertheless, this system is a beast. It performs cool and fairly quiet, all for what cost me just over $400. And even though the aesthetics weren't a part of the building process, I still think the PC ended up looking pretty damn good. And that's the end of the beginning of my 1080p Ultra build. Thanks for sticking around or even clicking on my video at all. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.